Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dynamics Fortnite Fridays.
Where we cover everything Dynamics, great and small. Hey, happy holidays, Bart.
Happy holidays to you, Dan. It's always nice when the tagline comes after I start the intro. When it's a guest presenter, it's just not the same. So I'm glad we're back as the tandem.
That doesn't have that fluidity, right? So
that's right. That's right.
So speaking of that fluidity and the things that we normally do you have a really awful dad joke for me today?
Of course, it's really awful. All right, so perfect. We got to try to keep some themes going here, and since our next show is kind of supposed to land basically around the new year, we're going to not be there. So I'm going to do my New Year's dad's joke today.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
What was Dr. Frankenstein's New Year's resolution?
Dr. Frankenstein's New Year's resolution. Oh boy. I don't know, Frankie.
To make new friends.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. I really like that. So actually I have two jokes. I have one seasonal one and another one that actually tickled me, and it's truly awful. So
all right, what do you got?
Okay, so here's the holiday one. So how do you wash your hands over the holidays?
Same way you always do.
With sanitizer.
Sanitizer. Okay, there you go.
But here's another one that I just thought it was super funny. So I'm just going to do it anyways, right? So a pair of cows are walking around a field. One says, "It's like, do you hear about the mad cow disease going around?" The other cow says, "Yeah, makes me glad I'm a penguin." I'm sorry. I just want that just absolutely hilarious. So on that, our content better be awesome this week, Bart. So
always, right? So what's new in Power Platform? Let's take it away. First thing, a lot of goodness in Dataverse and all kinds of crazy stuff that has now gone generally available. So link to Fabric, great thing. We got some bulk operation APIs that I'll actually show you a little bit more of in a little bit that just went generally available that are about, I don't know, like 6 times faster than the old bulk operation APIs for doing data loads and things like that. So pretty cool. And Elastic tables generally available. Really nice way to do large quantities of data that's kind of at that mini side of a one-to-many relationship. Throw them in an Elastic table and you've got unlimited storage and flexibility in how you want to store it. Throw it in JSON, change the JSON schema over time. All that's fine in an Elastic table because it's all built on NoSQL capabilities in there, but part of Dataverse now, so it can have those bound relationships and the security model and easy way to just configure it with the UI and all that stuff that Dataverse brings to the table that makes it so nice to use. So I'm not going to go all the way into all the details. I've told you quite a few of these things. That I want you to just read this and dig into it and come up with ways that you're going to utilize some of these great improvements in Dataverse in your business. Next one is a really nice summary. I'm not going to certainly talk about everything here. We are very, very happy to have Scott Durow as an employee of Microsoft now. He's been one of the MVP champions for a long, long time in our space, and we finally hired him. And he put together this great blog post about all the places that code gets used regularly in the context of Power Platform. So again, I'm just going to kind of scroll through this, but you get into that command line interface, and we've got ways to get in here and work with Dataverse, and we can use Power BI in there and Azure Service Bus, and we've got ways to use, share C# to make custom providers and custom functionality inside of Dataverse. And we've got the Azure bot services, and we've got ways to build open API connectors, and just lots and lots of interesting things that all get teased out in this blog post. So if you are a developer and you're a little bit curious about what developers might actually do in Power Platform, go read that. It's a really good summary. Power Pages used to have its own administrative portal. That is deprecated at this point, and we want everyone to be using the Power Pages or Power Platform Admin Center, because there's a whole bunch of great new functionality in there that'll do everything the old Portal Admin Center did plus some. So this is really just more of an announcement than anything else, but use it. Copilot Studio. man, is there ever a lot of change in the old Power Virtual Agent bot building capability that has evolved into Copilot Studio. So it did everything it always did, plus it's now got all kinds of new enhancements. And with all these new enhancements, there's just so much out there it can do. We have built an implementation guide. This thing's like a 100-page long implementation guide to guide you through a lot of the decision making of how you're going to build things, how you're going to architect things, how you're going to go grab data, how you're going to do ALM, what kind of outcomes are you explicitly trying to derive, and should you use generative AI to get to those outcomes, or should you be very bespoke about making a specific conversation that is a topic that you control completely? There's just all kinds of great guidance in this. So if you are wanting to either enhance some of your copilots, like the Dynamics copilots or the Microsoft 365 copilots, or you're wanting to build your own bots, this is a great implementation guide for you to pay attention to. So take a look at the blog post and download the guide, pay attention to it, and use it as much as you can. We also kind of snuck in a new preview feature that is part of the AI Builder functionality called a prompt builder, essentially, where you can create and save and store specific prompts that get tucked away inside of Dataverse, actually, and that then those prompts can get used specifically in the context of app functionality or in Power Automate when you need to like call the AI Builder generative AI model, and instead of kind of developing a prompt ad hoc every time you're trying to run it and have to capture that as input, you can actually build specific prompts that do things that are different than the few that were just tucked right into that AI Builder model to start with, and execute those as you're, calling it as part of the app or part of the automation. So really nice new feature. Pay attention to that if it's going to help you kind of shape the way generative AI could get used in the context of AI Builder. The command line interface has a new feature in it, and it basically makes it much easier to use authentication profiles and to be able to then take advantage of those throughout the rest of what all you're doing in that command line interface. So I'll let you read this for the details, but if you've ever struggled with those authentication profiles and how to make them work the way you wanted to, pay attention to what we've done for improvement to try to make that a lot simpler. Copilot inside of the Power Apps Maker Studio had been in general availability just in the US region for quite some time. We've now made that globally available, so you can use that natural language description of what you want for an app, and it'll go off and make that for you in many, many different languages around the globe. So that's kind of the big news in this update, along with one piece of guidance that you do need to allow data movement across regions, which you may want to be careful of if you're needing to not allow that for compliance reasons. So pay attention to that. But if your compliance isn't a blocker, take advantage of that and use the functionality. Along with that, process mining also went global. So a little description of what process mining is and how to use Copilot within it. And again, that you'd need to allow data movement across regions if you want all of the Copilot stuff to work inside of process mining, but it's certainly possible, and you can use it around the globe now as long as you're willing to let data movement happen. This one is really just a straight announcement that the Center of Excellence dev team had so many things on their backlog they were chewing through that they did not get to a state of development where they felt like it was prudent to release a version of the kit as an update in December. So watch for that in early January. They try to release those kit updates on the first Wednesday of every month. And since we're already halfway through December, we can pretty much count on it not coming out until January. Hopefully it is in that first week. Kind of depends on people's vacations, I'm sure, as they're celebrating the new year around the world. If you used a Canvas app with our new feature to allow native offline capability where Dataverse was the data repository for your Canvas app, there are some new capabilities to better handle images and files and to give you some options into how the syncing is going to work for those images and files between what's stored in the cloud in Dataverse and what's happening on your device especially in offline mode and how you want that to work. Should they get downloaded every time things sync, or should they be stored in the cloud until somebody actually clicks on it in the way it's stored? And then how are they going to upload back and things like that? So some nice little improvements in there that give you some flexibility as a maker in terms of how you want it to work. Nice that we've got this documentation about it as well. That same CLI that we talked about the auth profiles on with a new feature, we're finally getting around to documenting and publishing all the updates that came out in October. There's probably a whole bunch of stuff that came out in November that we'll get an update on soon as well. But sometimes you just don't know what you don't know until somebody puts a little documentation around it. So if you use that CLI quite a bit, at least take a look through this. There were quite a few enhancements in the October builds. And if you weren't aware of them, this will give you some insights into them. I'm sure we will see another one soon for what came out in November, and then we'll be ready for the December stuff soon. Environment variables. They are very, very powerful. They were a little bit confusing to use in the past because sometimes we would hide them on solution import if there was already a value there, and sometimes we would show them, and there were rules around all of it, but they weren't super public. Well, we have changed a lot of that. Now on solution import, every environment variable that's part of that solution will show up in the import experience. If there was already a data value there, it'll show it to you, whether that data value was stored in the environment as something you'd already put in there, or whether that data value was stored as part of the solution, or whether it's something you need to key in. It'll kind of put whatever there is in it so that you can look at it and make sure it's what you wanted and go ahead and import it. So that was one part of the nice enhancements. The other thing that is about to come in that'll be super helpful for a lot of folks is it was always a little bit cumbersome when you were wanting to export a solution from dev and not bring the dev environment variable along. You kind of had to be very explicit about going and removing it right during that solution extract capability. Well, now they're going to put a little toggle in here that will default to no, to say by default, the default behavior is going to be, we're just not going to bring that variable value along with the solution out of your dev environment, because that's what most DevOps people want, is that you don't want the dev value. You want to let people set that in QA and test and prod and other places you're moving it. But every once in a while, it is desired because you want that to be the thing that gets moved in. And so we're just going to make this little toggle you can kick on when you want to see that variable value come along as part of the solution. Anyway, nice enhancements to make those environment variables both easier to work with and way easier to deploy and know what you're getting as part of the deployment. Two more things, and we'll turn it over to you, Dan. Azure Key Vault can now be used to store credentials for the desktop flow or the RPA stuff in Power Automate to make connections to machines so that you don't have to hard code creds and save them someplace. You can just let them sit in Key Vault and connect up to that Key Vault, let it handle the creds, and that will authenticate as part of that action needs to execute. So nice enhancement to make that more secure, or at least easier to make it more secure with the way those desktop flows operate. And last, this one actually came out of the admin center. And when I put a link into the admin center, if you happen to be not an admin in your tenant and I gave you that link, you wouldn't see the contents of this. So I found a website that actually takes things out of the admin center and just makes them public. I did this on the last show as well. And this is basically just saying that with the auto claim policy I described on the last show for Power Apps, we are now bringing that auto claim policy management into the ability to use it for Power Automate user licenses and project user licenses as well. So auto claim is becoming a nice new feature you can use across not only Power Platform, but even some of the kind of M365 or D365 tools, depending on how you decided to license project as part of what you might go bring to your user base. So that's the Power Platform updates. Dan, I'll hand it over to you to talk about all the other good stuff.
Lots of good stuff. Once again, it's like I'm just amazed, like week after week after week, or fortnight after fortnight after fortnight, how much development we've been doing on the whole Power Apps, the Power Platform. It's just amazing. You know, what's just started out a couple years ago, and it's you know, sometimes you just kind of go like at our company, Bart. Anyways, enough of that modeling stuff, right? You know, let's talk about what's new in Business Central. Okay, so there's a few things in December, because I'm going to simplify this for myself so I can actually just find these really easily, right? So first of all, and this is a nice one, you can have, easily integrate generative AI with your AL solutions. So this is big news, right? So it's like, using the application language or the AL for Business Central, you can now use the Azure OpenAI service available to you. So any of your coding and your partners can do all that. So connect, make it easy, seamless, all kinds of things. So that's some pretty big news. If you're a Business Central person, it's like there's just a ton of good stuff there this week. So let me just go to the next one for December. So the next one is an e-submission of VAT returns in Denmark, right? So basically, it's like, that's a value-added tax for Denmark that they can actually provide to the government for automatically through using the system. A couple things for localization. So first of all, there's an Icelandic localization, right? And delocalization, if you want to pull it out of there. And then there's a lot more countries. It's like they didn't spell these out individually, but there's a whole lot, right? So American Samoa, Anguilla, Aruba, Brunei, so on and so forth, all the way to the Vanuatu. And it's like, so, by the way, the first time I ever heard of this country or this name was on Survivor. Wasn't it one of the first countries they did on that? So just a little bit trivia.
It's interesting that they call Iceland out specifically, and then they just put everybody else down here under a bullet point.
Exactly. That's why I found that kind of funny. But there is a lot of partners and development shops in Dynamics world from Iceland for a very long period of time.
Maybe that's why they made it special. Yeah.
But anyways, it's like that's the trivia for this week, guys. So let's see what else we have here for December, right? So we have December. Oh, e-invoicing for Denmark, of course, yeah. And then I think that's let's see, the last one we actually have here. Oh, digital vouchers. There's two more here. So we have digital vouchers out this and so this is kind of interesting. So on these digital vouchers, right? So it is, you can have, like, you want proof of the GL entry, right? For that transaction is going to be done for the full audit trail. So you have to link it to the source document. So now we can do that digitally. So we actually have proof of that for the countries in the Danish booking. So again, part of that e-invoicing. And the last one, let's just see. Yeah, you know what? I thought this would be a whole lot easier doing the control find with the highlighting yellow than it is, but clumsy. So
too many things that match your text.
Exactly. So the last thing I wanted to put up here is this VAT posting in the general ledger setup. And so this one is a value-added tax, right? But the problem with this one is, so usually you have the posting, so it's like you have a date on the posting for the transaction. And so you have the posting with the VAT postings usually on the same day. Sometimes it may be different based upon when the goods are delivered. So it may be in different fiscal periods. Now, the problem with that is if they're in a different fiscal period, well, we need to make a match up, right? Or open that previous fiscal period that may have been closed to be able to update that. Just like, so if there's a change in order and things. Well, that's problematic. So now what we did is we actually made two different dates, so we don't have to open that fiscal period to actually do those transaction tax. It seems like a simple thing, but it's actually going to save a lot of people a lot of time and effort to do that. So anyways, I thought that was pretty good. Now, what I find is really interesting is, the co-pilots we've done for Business Central. And so the first one, and I think this is super nice, is a conversational chat for a Copilot 365. So you can answer questions like, okay, tell me how many sales orders I have for Bart Snerico, right? Or it's like, tell me like the last 3 invoices they paid. So it's contextual help, right? On the chat. So that's just a really slick, nice things to be able to do, to be able to have that generative AI and the conversational tone from those orders. And so Business Central is the first to do that. I haven't seen any of the ERPs do that otherwise yet. And then a couple things we talked about with the bank reconciliation. We talked about this like 3 shows ago, about the bank rec matches. And then, the first Copilot they put out, and this kind of summarizes it, about like the marketing text. So you can actually have a description of an item to be able to, it's like, tell me a couple, attributes of this item, and it'll actually write that description. Not unlike what we do for commerce, but this is within Business Central. There's new sales and forecasting extension on this. The payment predictions is new, and the cash flow. Now, finance and supply chain just got this payment predictions and this cash flow this last year. and it took us a long time to actually get this developed. I'm amazed how quickly we can develop now on these products. So it's like they got the payment predictions and the cash flow, just like, just lickety split snap in there. So I thought that was a pretty interesting how quickly we got some of these co-pilots in for Business Central. So that's the Business Central updates for this fortnight. Now,
we are a co-pilot company. It's obvious.
Yeah, but it's going so fast, right?
I know.
The dev work's going so fast. Anyways, human resources. I've talked about this for over a year, right? We moved the platform from human resources. We're bringing it back into the finance and supply chain platform, or the F&O platform, as I can call it. Well, we've talked about that, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands the deadline for this is December 31st, 2023. If you haven't done it, get it done this week or next week, right? Because you're running out of time. I don't know how many customers are out there that still have that, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that and get that done. Now, well, let's go into finance and supply chain. So I've talked about cross app. I talked about the project stuff. I've talked about finance and human resources for 10.38, but I haven't talked about the supply chain. And there's some really nice things in here for supply chain 10.0.38 that we'll see here. So the first thing is, if we go into this, it's like the cost management. Now, some of the large multinational companies that I work with, they want to have the costing, but the costing can get really complex because you have VAT costing, or excuse me, you have IFRS and you have GAAP costing, and then you have different things for the different countries and different valuations in this. Well, we've made it so you can actually have three, or you can have parallel accounting practices for the standard cost using the multiple configurations for these different, VAT, IFRS, or GAAP, IFRS, or any localizations that you have on there. So you can have the inventory, the items, and the cost overheads onto that, and put those in the cost, and actually compared on those from the different cost structures, multiple configurations from one order or one run on that. So this will allow for any like localizations or fluctuations in currencies, and this is part of the global accounting add-in. So if you're a cost accountant that does things in a large multinational, you'll want to read this, right? The second thing on this is inventory and costing. Now this is, we can apply compound charges, and there's some other things we're going to talk about the costing, but what we used to do is that you have a base price on something. It's like, hey, we're going to have like a surcharge of 5% for fuel and 3% for something else or whatever. But it's always on the base price. Now we can say it's compounded. So if we have a 10% on a $100 bill, that's $110. If we have another 10% on that, that's another $11. That's $121 will be the total cost. And we used to do it like on the $100 and on the $100, so they won't add up the same. It'd be $120. So instead of 121, so there's compounding on those charges, and we've simplified this and sped those up, and you'll see that in a second too. Well, there's an enhanced order processing pricing. So we used to have to say, hey, do confirm that order before it actually finalizes and calculates that price. Now we don't have to do that. We can actually skip that. It's much more efficient to be able to do that, and it's done more quickly on the system with the cost basis. So some enhancements there. The next one is like, if you kind of get deep in the product, you can find on-hand information by attribute. Okay, so it's more than just one attribute. So you can have a product attribute, which is say, hey, if you're looking for a computer, I want one that's, has 4 gigs or 8 gigs or 16 gigs of memory, for instance, right? That's an attribute. So you can actually search by those attributes. There's also something called batch attributes. So for instance, it's like if you have like a chemical or an acid or a base that has a pH level, then you might want it to be like a, we want something between like 7 and 7.5 pH, right? That's a base on that. Or a storage dimension by site or location or inventory. So what we've done is we made it a whole lot easier to find the information that you want, because this can get really complex with the product attributes, and it wasn't really easy to search. So we made that a whole lot easier for our users. Now, we also have done a updated on the inventory mobile app. So inventory can be really complex because it's like, it's easy to kind of find what you have on hand, but what's allocated, what's available, what's coming in, and what the time phases of those. So we've actually redid the whole mobile device to make that a whole lot easier and a lot more efficient and speedier across the board. So a new mobile app. And then, okay, so there's some changes in manufacturing and asset management. So this says you can really react to last minute changes on this. So we've added like a margin to the manual scheduling, right? So there's a buffer we can say is like, okay, how much we want to go in for the manual schedule to give us this like, plus or minus to be able to get this done like a day or several hours. So we know we can make sure that we get those on time. There's also, how much inventory do we have on hand, and can we make the best use of that? And what do we have coming in? And what can we make until those come in? So tell me what I can make now, and then plan the stuff that we can actually split out and make later when those come in. So we can actually look at what's called a positive days. How many days can we use that inventory in there within that planning range? And then it seems like it's kind of a simple thing, but we didn't have it. Avoid releasing to warehouse when materials are missing. So you can't make it until you have all the materials for many items. Cars and RVs are different because they can always put things in later, or a lot of things in later. But a lot of the times you don't want to release anything to the warehouse and say, we can't do this production order until those materials are available. And we had allowed that before because some companies would allow negative inventory. So in other words, they wouldn't record the receipt of that inventory, even though it comes in later until a later time. But now we're going to say, hey, don't do it until you get that inventory on. And then you can actually change the items on the inventory. So we're going to be talking about this a little bit. It's a little more difficult to change a bill of material on a production order. You'd have to make a new one and add that new bill of material. Now we can actually swap out things on the route and the production order. So small features, but tons of usability within that within the production order. Just makes life simpler. There's now a new demand planning homepage, and this is in preview. So we'll be talking about the demand planning a lot more in January, February, and probably April when it's released. But the new demand planning is a full rewrite of the forecasting planning module within this, right? So the homepage is going to give you updates into like all the forecasting, the inventory, any disruptions, anything from AI. This can be affected under that. That's going to be a co-pilot under that. So all kinds of nice things on this demand planning. And for me, this is one of the most exciting features or modules we've been releasing in the last couple of years. So let's go back here a little bit and let's see about okay. The next one is another master planning. We talked about the positive days within the planning system. Now this one's just going to say we want to look at coverage groups for like a bill material or a formula in the route within a specific demand line or a sales order line that actually is that demand. So it could be a forecast. So we can actually if you it used to automatically default to the active one. Now we can actually have one that's part of a group. So that's a nice feature. Let's see, the inform vendors about like when items are about to ship. We've added a new requested line for this, and we want to make sure that we validate with the different vendors when it's time to ship, because each line can have their own release schedule on that, and we want to make sure we notify. Now, that may sound like a simple thing, but if you start doing calculations, it's like when if you want to see they're on time, it's like here's when we requested it versus when you can actually ship it. Is that going to be considered late or not when they validate that they can do that? And then which date do you want to go off? So it can get really complicated. So we've added this so we can actually run those metrics and actually validate versus when's requested versus they validate and then when we released it out. So kind of funny because I was out in the UK in this spring, and there was the discussion for about an hour on that specific topic itself. The next thing is integrate with Sustainability Manager. So, for our transportation management system on any loads that go out, you can say it's like, okay, what's the potential carbon footprint that we're going to have from that? So, also is the warehouse management only mode. So WMS can run it itself. We've talked about that on a prior show, so I'm not going to dig too far into that. And then the last thing here is it's like, you can optimize the inbound receiving process. So with this inbound receiving process, if you have a lot of items that are batch or serialized, it takes a lot of scanning, right? Especially if you have a license plate. Now we can say, hey, let's receive these. We might have a license plate that has this information. We can get to it later. We'll just receive it in and then validate all these serial numbers at a later date or batch those in. So again, just some like on the ground functionality. A few things for updates on this. So on the asset management, we have a thing that we can actually, this is the start date versus the expected start date. So, so you can actually have the scheduled versus the actual start date of when we're going to monitor that. So that's one thing on the asset management. I talked about the positive days a little bit. Now we have ATP calculations to consider user modified delivery schedules on the sales order line, right? So ATP is available to promise. It's not capable of available to promise, but this is our lead time when it's like we feel that we're going to have something in or there's something scheduled out there. But now we actually want to work with the delivery schedule for those time period for that's going to for that delivery to make sure that you get that within that modified day. So it matches that. So it works backwards from that delivery time and the ATP to get it out. Again, positive days on there. This one right here is like it's a job status for an errors when you're doing planning optimization. You can say, hey, stop it if you get an error, and then we want to fix it and then rerun it, or run the whole thing and tell me what the errors are, and I'll kind of fix those later. So that's what that does for that bad status. The next one is start dates of production orders of all components delayed when one of the components is delayed. So basically it says, if we don't have enough inventory, as we mentioned before, you can't start a release of the inventory. So push everything back within that production order and all those dates so we don't have to worry about getting those early. So everything's pushed back. This one is you can group or split items for planning. It wasn't there before. It was on the old planning system. So sometimes you just want to split an order. There's supposed to be 100. I'll make 30 today, then I'll make 70 next week. Or if you want to group things together, like, with similar demand, often we see that within process manufacturing with batches. It's like, okay, we have 3 different batches. We can actually mix into one because they have the same attributes. Use margins for scheduling, so that receipt margin, when we schedule that out, it's like, so if it takes actually a day or a half a day to get through your receipt process once they get to the dock, that's taken into consideration. And the next one is synchronizing updates for the requested ship and receipt days for intercompany, because you have a sales order and a purchase order. So you want to make sure that if you have that requested date within the sales order, it goes to that other company automatically updated in that purchase order for the receipt versus that ship date. We have, as I mentioned before, with the Business Central for that product inquiry in-app Copilot chat. That's pretty cool. I haven't worked with that yet, but I'm looking forward to it. A few other things is like, there's a change, the bill of material and the routing, as I mentioned before. Standard cost posting to production and batch with the scrap account, right? So you can have different methods for how you're going to scrap these by different type of products. Attribute-based pricing by company. It used to be just attribute-based pricing across the board. So you can actually set that. So as I mentioned before, if it's a pH level of a certain point, it might have, it's called, consider a potency into that. And then we can actually make it more valuable or price it differently based upon how potent it is, for instance. And then sales and marketing, there is a new pricing management preview. There's a price management performance to make it quicker. I kind of mentioned before, we had to do those confirm, but we've made it also more performant. And there's a new workspace for pricing as well. And then again, the warehouse management, we kind of mentioned that before. That was just like, you don't release until it's full. Now, that was kind of quick through this. I have 3 other updates. So the first one is there's a finance premium SKU. So with finance, we have an FP&A that we're going to be releasing by December 31st. Just making it so we can make it in that Gartner quadrant for the next year. Hopefully overtake Oracle as the leader within ERP. But in that, it's like there's a no SKU for the users. So that's called a premium SKU. You might want to read through that if you do any licensing. But it's a bit more expensive, but allows you to create and edit FP&A reports. Users of those reports that are just viewing those, there is no additional licensing necessary for that. Proactive quality updates, look at those, as Bart mentions down below, these are the solution updates, but these are by country. So you want to look at these and see what your country is going to be updated. And the last thing I want to talk about and show is the Secure One Box developer. So you can license and buy environments, tier 2 environments from Microsoft for those developments, but most of our customers actually do one box developments on their own Azure subscription. It's just cheaper that way, and you have your control over it. But you're responsible for all security and all the updates and all that because that's your own environment. So this article kind of goes through what they're consisted of, right? Just like you have the disk, load balancers, the network, and the network IP. But also shows you what these configurations for, and then the remote desktop and, what ports that's going to be open to. And maybe you should consider maybe your Azure Bastion instead of that for an RDB process and what ports to open. What you need to do for virtual customization, what IP addresses are for what environment or geography. And then, some little bit of troubleshooting and some recommendations and, some things that is like if you're developing, you don't always think about the security, even though we should, but it kind of guides you through that. And it has a little bit of FAQ at the end. So if you're a developer and if you have a one box development environment, take a quick gander at that. So with that, Bart, it kind of brings me to the end of my topical information.
Man, it feels like they rewrite half the product every time you do a release anymore, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like some of these were just like, I was like, I'm still amazed, still wowed by some of the stuff that we put out. And it's just a lot of really good content, right? Really good features there. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for sticking with us. I know we went just a bit over, but there was a lot to cover, and you'll get a break here at the end of the year. We'll come back to you in mid-January and have another update that'll, I'm sure, be chock full of great stuff again. So have a couple of good fortnights. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holiday for whatever you do celebrate, and we'll see you all soon.
See you in a month. Take care, everybody.